Current Affair!
Hello everyone, I'm Emma Lindblom. Welcome to A Current Affair for this Friday, June 1st. Our first story today comes from the research team at Flinders University. Calls are being made for reform to current laws regarding the sentencing of corporations when committing environmental crimes due to reckless or negligent behaviour. This public demand was spurred on by what were considered to be lenient sentences handed down in oil spill disasters both here in Australia and in the United States. Environmental crimes differ from other federal and corporate crimes in their capacity to affect a broad array of people and ecosystems. This is leading people to ask whether the punishments given by courts for these devastating crimes are enough to enforce regulations and deter companies from committing such offences. Later in the program, we will be crossing live to Flinders sentencing experts to explain some of the fundamental issues involved in sentencing corporations for these environmental crimes. First up though, we will be talking to our American correspondent Robert, and then on to Nicole, our reporter in Queensland, who will be talking about punishments handed down in specific oil cases. Go.
Thank you, Emma. I'm here on the Golden Gate Bridge to talk to you about the famous COSCO Busen oil spill of 2007 that has had yet another recent development in the past week. The company, Fleet Management, has already been charged with 6 felonies and paid out $10 million in fines back in 2008. But just this past week, the companies involved had to pay out a substantial $44 million settlement from their lingering civil case. This money has been split up for restoration projects, state penalties and assessment costs. This most recent decision has been made with criticism from environmental leaders and local politicians, as the settlement, even though it looks substantial, is not sufficient. The clean-up cost alone for the oil spill was $70 million, and the company has only been fined collectively $54 million. It is clear in America that there is a push for harsher corporate criminal penalties for these companies. However, it still needs to go further to punish individuals and collectives to truly deter and make them accountable for these heinous crimes. Now to cross to Nicole in Cape Morton, Australia. This is Robert reporting from San Francisco.
Yeah! In local news, a criminal sentence was handed down against the Hong Kong company that owns the vessel responsible for one of the largest coastal oil spills in Australian history. Here, in 2009, the Pacific Adventurer ship leaked 276 tonnes of heavy oil fuel. As you can see, the area is yet to fully recover. The Crown prosecution sought to fine the corporate defendants the maximum penalty of $1.75 million for the charge of discharging oil in coastal waters. In reaching his verdict, Justice Stirnie of the Queensland District Court classified the oil spill as very serious, but not the worst category. He considered the $25 million payment under the Federal Court Civil Agreement and the $1.8 million in private civil claims to be mitigating factors to show that the companies responsible for the spill are good corporate citizens. The owners of the ship pleaded guilty, and these two companies were each fined $600,000, criminally convicted and ordered to publicly apologise. All charges were dropped against the captain of the ship and other corporate defendants due to insufficient prospects of conviction. This penalty pales in comparison to the $105 million profit earned by the Marine Service Division of this company last year. I'll keep enjoying the scenery. Back to the studio.
Thanks very much for that, Nicole and Robert. Now we're crossing over to Dr. Ferguson in her office in Woolloomooloo.
Okay.
Thank you, Emma. I will be discussing some of the issues in relation to sentencing corporations for environmental offences. As with other cases of environmental pollution, oil spills often arise from a defective system or protocol rather than wrongful conduct of an individual. This means that the required outcome of sentencing may not be achieved by the imposition of liability onto an individual. Therefore, it is clearly necessary that in these cases to impose liability on the corporation as well as or instead of the individual to correct systematic faults. In prosecuting corporations for environmental crimes, sentencing fines depends on the assumption that financial penalties act as a deterrent for corporations responsible for major environmental breaches. However, there are various issues to take into account when considering the deterrent value of these fines. Firstly, it must be considered whether a corporation, as a legal entity, can be deterred. As imposing a penalty on a corporation will affect the response from senior management, it can be assumed that deterrence of a corporation can be achieved through financial penalties. Secondly, it must be considered whether the possibility of prosecution is a significant factor for corporations when considering how stringently they conform to environmental regulations. Many factors influence a corporation's motivation to abide by environmental protection regulations. Non-conformity will remain profitable until the possible financial costs to offenders outweighs any likely economic benefits, such as achieving an illegal competitive advantage. This leads me to my last point, whether the penalty imposed by the courts for environmental crimes such as oil spills is large enough to achieve this anticipated deterrent effect. The low maximum penalties for these environmental crimes in Australia do not achieve the deterrence for larger companies, as they are simply able to absorb these fines as a cost of business. However, it is also important to note that fines which allow corporations to remain in business and are ultimately just paid for by stockholders and consumers will not achieve the required deterrence. In these situations, community and publicity orders may be considered a better alternative punishment. I'll cross now to Dr. Priestley and Goodwin from Flinders University, who have conducted some serious research into these types of punishments.
Oh, so sorry. Firstly, it's great to see the media getting involved with these important issues. As we've just heard, Dr. Ferguson has clearly outlined how a simple fine against a corporation can be a highly inadequate penalty. We would like to share with you some more creative penalties that can be ordered by the courts to address the inadequacy of fines.
Yeah, look, a really effective penalty for these corporations is a community service order. Such orders require corporate offenders to undertake a project that benefits the community in some way. These are particularly appropriate for environmental crime, as this service involves helping repair the environmental harm caused by the crime.
Yeah, these community service orders are a particularly effective way of achieving specific and general deterrence, and they make up for the lack of deterrence achieved by fines. Imposing a small fine on a large and wealthy company, or a large fine on a company that can't afford to pay it, fails to deter both the offending company and other future corporate offenders.
Yeah, community service orders also provide rehabilitation for the company. When the officers and the employees of a convicted corporation are involved in a community service project, they are made aware of the seriousness of the offence. This increases accountability and discipline in the company and can prompt revision of company systems to avoid future violations.
Yeah, these orders really do achieve the aims of sentencing by deterring, rehabilitating and punishing.
Now, you may be thinking that a corporation could gain favourable publicity from completing a community service order, but imposing a publicity order can counteract this by ensuring any publicity is negative.
Yeah, publicity orders are what is commonly known as naming and shaming, where the court orders a conviction to be made public. These orders ensure that companies can't just buy their way out of trouble by paying a fine.
Yeah, instead of just having these companies pay a fine, a publicity order can threaten a company's most valuable asset, its reputation. The lasting effects of the order on the corporation's business can sometimes be highly uncertain. Despite this, publicity orders are a penalty that is highly effective in achieving retribution, as well as both specific and general deterrence.
Now, courts in the United States have used community service and publicity orders as a sentencing option for some time. In Australia, only New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia's environmental protection legislation contains provisions giving the courts power to order publication of the conviction and order an offender to carry out specified projects for the restoration or enhancement of the environment. The New South Wales and Victorian courts do regularly impose community service and publicity orders. However, despite having the power, the South Australian court has never even made a community service or publicity order.
Our extensive research into this area has shown us that all Australian jurisdictions should provide and actually make use of the legislative power to grant these community and publicity orders. These orders should be made in circumstances where the court believes they are appropriate and should be made in addition to fines. So let's name and shame and get these companies cleaning up their mess.
Thank you for that insight, doctors. What do you think at home? Log on to our website and let us know. Thanks very much. Until next time, stay right, Adelaide.